If you're looking for a vacation destination, the turquoise waters of the Caribbean have never been warmer. It now seems clear that the American military deployments in the Caribbean Sea are not just aimed at limiting drug trafficking or at counting fishing spoons. At the end of November 2025, the USS Gerald Erford, the pride of the United States Navy and the largest aircraft carrier in the world, left the Mediterranean to head for the Caribbean, accompanied by destroyers, cruisers, and submarines, bringing the number of American personnel in the area to around 15,000, which is nearly 25 to 30% of the surface ships deployed by the Navy. Rather, the United States has officially designated the Cartel of the Suns, a group that Washington claims is led by the Venezuelan government, as a terrorist organization in Venezuela. However, the Cartel of the Suns is not a cartel in the strict sense of the word, but rather a generic term that refers to certain roles. Even worse, American President Donald Trump recently stated that he does not rule out a ground invasion of Venezuela. While mentioning the possibility of direct talks with President Nicolas Maduro before considering Venezuelan airspace as closed. What makes the situation interesting is that all the tension remains exclusively focused on Venezuela, despite the presence of much heavier traffic, according to the United Nations in other countries of the region. As we saw in our previous video, the question is no longer so much whether the United States will strike, but when and to what extent. The White House clearly wants a regime change, but also to protect its interests and its present and future assets. The military deployments, while impressive, are therefore only part of a broader strategy to overthrow Maduro and put an end to nearly 30 years of Chavismo. Bienvenido to Terrabellum.
La geografía
Channel if you have video. Feel free not to miss the next videos. Stretching along a third of the coast, less than 3,000 kilometers from Florida, guardian of the vital maritime routes connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific via Panama, and holder of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. For Washington, the country is not only a shield against external influences, but also a major geoeconomic lever, capable of reshaping the global balance of energy and trade. The United States has supported regime change for over 20 years, from the failed coup in 2002 to backing Guaido. In 2019, their greatest fear is that Caracas will become a forward base for Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran in their historical backyard. In the context of international rivalry between major powers, Venezuela is a particularly painful thorn in the side of the United States. It's an asymmetric pressure lever. Moscow distracts Washington from Ukraine there, Beijing secures critical oil assets there, and Tehran transports drones and missiles right under the Americans' noses. Controlling Caracas means locking down the Caribbean while also weakening the global capabilities of rivals in other strategic theaters. In this era of major power struggles, Ukraine, Iranian nuclear issues, and the Taiwan crisis, the meteoric rise of Hugo Chavez in 1998 marked the fatal break with Venezuela's pro-American tradition. This coup-leading lieutenant colonel from 1990, democratically elected on an anti-elite platform, nationalized Petróleos de Venezuela, Sociedad Anónima, in 2007, and effectively expropriated ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips. He centralized power through 26 constitutional reforms and locked down the economy, directly threatening long-standing American oil interests. The situation then completely slipped out of George W. Bush's control, whom Chavez called El Diablo during a speech at the United Nations in 2006, and Venezuela will continue its emancipation. The Monroe Doctrine is completely violated. Beijing will grant more than $60 billion in loans from 2007 to 2018, repaid in crude oil at cut-rate prices, as low as $5 per barrel. China will effectively control about 10% of the Orinoco heavy oil fields. Moscow delivers S-300 anti-aircraft system with a range of 400-kilometer Su-30 fighter jet, T-72 tank, for about $12 billion, all reinforced by maintenance contracts and drones in France. Tehran supplies Shahed drones with a maximum range of 2,500 kilometers cm, 90 anti-ship missiles, but also refined fuel, vital for the Venezuelan army, as Caracas lost this capability after nationalization. For the White House, the situation is very clear. Oil dollars are flying eastward, and these military agreements, strengthened in 2025 by 17 contracts with Moscow and the opening of a drone factory by Tehran, military muscle. Trump is determined to correct the course, but only after a prolonged period of undermining. In March 2013, Nicolás Maduro inherited a Chavista system weakened by 14 years of wear and tear, internal purges, depletion of social reserves, and dependence on oil. The sharp drop in oil prices in 2014 deprived the government of the vital funds needed to finance its socialist and military policies, and, above all, its massive imports, triggering a historic recession. An 80% drop in gross domestic product between 2013 and 2022, Maduro also inherited an economy dismantled by his own policies. Excessive interventionism and massive expropriations nationalized 1,600 companies and shut down 1,000 factories. There was also devastating monetary manipulation, which led to hyperinflation peaking at 1.7 million% in 2018, and thus forced a de facto dollarization since 2019. And of course, there was the nationalization of the Venezuelan oil giant VSA in 2007, and the exodus of oil technicians, which wiped out the expertise, with oil production collapsing from 3.2 to 0.7 million barrels per day, according to the World Bank. In 2023, 76% of Venezuelan exports came from oil and minerals, with the main clients being the United States, China, and Spain. The disastrous state of the post-Chavez economy was also worsened by American sanctions since 2014, which were tightened under Donald Trump's administration. All of this is crippling the economy and forcing Caracas into opaque barter deals, mainly involving gold and unrefined crude oil, coveted by its allies and South American neighbors. It is on this opacity that Washington builds its accusations. So, drug trafficking, but also arms trafficking, for example, to the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia in Colombia. Since 2014, these strategic vulnerabilities have become more apparent to Washington, and the American military deployments in the Caribbean in 2025 may exploit them. Finally, what you need to understand is that there is an American strategic logic in three phases. From 2015 to 2019, it's the phase of political pressure with support for the opposition. Guaido was recognized in January 2019 by more than 50 countries, and Maduro was effectively subjected to a significant diplomatic blockade. But the strategy of political pressure would fail in the face of a fractured opposition and the grip of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, on the national institutions. The second phase is that of economic pressure. Since 2014, with targeted sanctions against Petróleos de Venezuela, SA in 2019, and the freezing of the assets of its American subsidiary for up to $7 billion, then sectoral sanctions on all oil, gold, the goal being to suffocate alternative and illicit revenues, with losses estimated at several $100 billion. For Venezuela in 2025, it's the third phase with direct involvement of the American military apparatus. While protecting the interests of Chevron, which benefits from a waiver on its oil activities in Venezuela, the United States has decided to take things to the next level. Officially, it's the fight against drug trafficking. And a few spectacular interceptions of GoFast serve as a showcase for the general public. Behind the scenes, this activity hides a much more ambitious strategy: to establish an almost complete blockade of the country to cut Venezuela off from its commercial and military partners. This system is meant to act like a sword of Damocles over Caracas's sources of income, but also over the supply of weapons, which are essential for maintaining power. The American logic is very simple. If regime change couldn't be achieved by supporting the opposition or through economic sanctions, it might be achieved by a maritime blockade capable of drastically reducing the income from trade in kind. The resulting isolation is meant to weaken Nicolás Maduro's position within the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, his own party, and lead to his departure. In this situation, Washington could consider three options. The first is to negotiate an agreement in which Nicolás Maduro would agree to resign and leave the country in exchange for guarantees. The second would be based on direct American military action, favoring airstrikes against key infrastructure on Venezuelan territory. And finally, the third could be supporting underground activities aimed at fostering the emergence of a civil military movement capable of overthrowing the current regime. Each option is considered together as part of a comprehensive strategy combining economic pressure, military coercion, and political maneuvering, with the aim of completing an undermining effort that has been ongoing for more than 20 years. Yet, nothing is decided for the United States. A negotiated settlement currently seems out of reach, although this path remains the most appealing for the United States. It would allow for an orderly transition without exorbitant military costs and while preserving essential oil infrastructure. Yet, past initiatives, whether those from a few years ago or the Barbados agreements in 2023, have all for now ended in failure. Focusing on Maduro is also a mistake. He does not embody it alone. Neo-Chavist Vladimir Padrino Lopez has been leading the army since 2014. Diosdado Cabello leads the party and commands the police forces, while the intelligence services are largely under Cuban control. Since the agreements under Chavez, these actors have had a heavy influence on decisions and have complicated Washington's strategy. Offering simultaneous guarantees to everyone looks difficult, just as relying on an internal faction does, since Maduro is actually only the tip of the iceberg. Yet a large-scale American invasion also seems unlikely, as it would trigger massive backlash in the United States and unanimous international condemnation. A recent Columbia Broadcasting System poll also shows that 70% of Americans are strongly opposed to military action in Venezuela. Meanwhile, another Ipsos poll from November 14 reveals that 55% of Americans believe the risks outweigh the benefits. With the midterms approaching and Donald Trump's approval ratings declining since March, such a political gamble is proving untenable. Some neighboring countries like Trinidad and Tobago, the Dominican Republic, Guyana, or Panama quietly support an intervention. Potentially joined by El Salvador, Argentina, and even Ecuador, only Mexico and Cuba are firmly opposed, while Brazil and Colombia choose a different approach. For example, the situation is much more difficult than it seems, because despite the open hostility, Washington still grants exemptions to Chevron for its imports of Venezuelan oil, a sign that the petrochemical sector is in any case not meant to be destroyed in a forceful operation, but rather to eventually finance reconstruction and American investments. The recent military deployments, in fact, combine a show of force with a warning. A naval blockade remains possible. The B-52s, which took off from Minot Air Force Base with their transponders activated, reveal a lack of intention, surprise, while the strikes against the go-fast vessels reveal economic and political pressure, still leaving the United States and Donald Trump some room before a potential escalation, whether it be closing the airspace or boarding tankers and partnerships before a ground invasion, which would remain a last resort. Even the third option, ultimately, for the United States appears just as if not more shaky, because another way to remove Maduro and seize Venezuela would rely on a civil military overhaul of power, thus minimizing the political fallout for the United States while preserving infrastructure and promoting a transitional government, a classic American method in Latin America. Signs of this are already visible beyond statements about CIA operations, such as those from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has been opposing Maduro for more than a decade, not to mention the suspicious fire at a petrochemical complex in Anzoátegui, which suggests covert sabotage. And so maybe the petrochemical sector in the event of an intervention might not come out so unscathed after all. This scenario would also open the door to targeted surgical strikes, for example, on an S-300 system or a drone base, to signal firm determination and create openings for the opposition. Then there remains the question of timing, popular support, and real military and political backing, especially after the failure of political pressure so far. In any case, the United States is now too committed and finds itself at a turning point. Admitting failure would be embarrassing after 20 years of efforts on Venezuela. Not to mention the deployment of 25 to 30% of United States Navy personnel, which seems to indicate that something is about to happen. The fall of Maduro in this context seems inevitable. The only question then would be how and when. But we also know that on Terra Bellum, geopolitics always has its share of surprises. Do you think the end is near for Maduro? Will the United States back down? What place does the crisis in Venezuela have among other global conflicts? We're waiting for your feedback in the comments. To support Terabellum and give a stress-free Christmas gift, use our Holzkern link in the description and enter the code Terabellum to get 15% off. Just a reminder, like, share, and comment in connection with the video. We have to keep repeating this on YouTube, unfortunately. Check out previous videos you may have missed. YouTube doesn't always send notifications, so activate the bell. Topics include the new Chinese aircraft carrier, the Russian economy, Trump in Nigeria, and more to watch. Thank you to the members who support the channel financially. Money is the lifeblood of war and funds our humble videos. You also get bonuses like access to all Geopolitics magazine issues. I'm also working on providing the written script as an article, as some of you requested. And by the way, if you are a student mainly in a master's or doctoral program, a researcher, or even a professor, don't hesitate to contact us at Author Terabellum Father, and you have the opportunity to send us your valuable contributions. Thanks for your loyalty. Great to see you again. This was Quentin for Terabellum. See you next time.